Welcome to our first ever PropTech debate, brought to you in partnership with the brilliant organisation that is DebateMate. For those of you that haven't heard of DebateMate, they are an organisation that powers social change through world-class communication training. They deliver training through schools, with teachers and with major corporates as well. I'd recommend going and having a look at their website. I first came across DebateMate about a month ago when they put together a debate on effective leadership. And I was inspired by the debate and impressed by the quality of the debaters as well. And I reached out to Georgia and Jess at DebateMate to put together this idea to bring the style of debating to the PropTech industry. And thankfully they were on board and they are hosting the event with us today. We are looking today at whether acquisitions will kill innovation. This is a topic that I see discussed quite often as the industry is maturing. We're seeing more and more mergers and acquisitions happening, and there's often conversations about whether that then encourages a company to thrive and allows them to really grow, or whether that actually stifles innovation. And I think what we'll find today is that there are many factors that go into making an acquisition successful for both parties. And you will hear from 3 of the DebateMate world-class champions and 3 PropTech entrepreneurs and founders who will share their expertise. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jess and Georgia at DebateMate. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Sammy, and welcome everyone to this exciting debate. As Sammy said, we're DebateMate. We're really looking forward to spending the next hour with you. So the poll's up now. Please tell us what you think on this motion, on this topic. This House believes acquisitions kill innovation. And when we're talking about House, it's the people proposing, it's the government. So please tell us, do you agree, disagree, or are you unsure? Fill that in now. And whilst you're doing that, before we introduce our fantastic panel, just to let you know, I'm Jess, I'm the Managing Director of DebateMate, and my co-chair is...
Hi everyone, I'm Georgia and I am Director of Partnerships at DebateMate. Thank you so much for joining us.
And the 2 of us are going to be chairing the debate today. Yeah. Really looking forward to hearing what the speakers say on this topic. As Sammy mentioned, we're DebateMate. We are a social business that's been going for about 10 years. We divide half of our time working with fantastic young people across the world, developing communication and leadership skills through debate. And we have a really cool after-school debate club program taught by university mentors, and the students get a chance to debate in great locations like the Houses of Parliament. It's an amazing employability program. And then the other half of our time is spent working with companies on communication and leadership training and big events. Since lockdown, we have started doing a lot of debates online. We always had done debates in person, but we found a market that's really exciting. And the first debate we did, we thought we'd get about 20 people and we got hundreds. So we haven't looked back since. So we've been doing debates every 2 weeks, and they're really fun, engaging format. And we really hope that you enjoy this one this morning. So just to tell you what's going to happen, I think everyone should have voted now, and we'll publish those polls in a minute. I'll be inviting the speakers to join me in just a second, and we will have a very interactive live debate where each speaker will put forward a case for their side, the proposition and opposition, and there'll be an opportunity for you to take part in questions, as Sammy mentioned. Feel free to use the chat throughout as well, the chat at the bottom of the screen, to show appreciation for the speakers or drop any comments that you have, and then click on the Q&A if you've got any questions, which we'll be addressing later on in the debate. You will also be the judges, so you'll be telling us what you think on this topic as well later. You'll be telling us if you agree or disagree at the end and when we announce the winners. So before we go into the rules of how the debate's going to work, please join me in a big virtual round of applause and welcoming onto our virtual stage our fantastic debaters. So when you're ready, guys, if you want to turn your cameras on, let's welcome them. Woo! Okay, fantastic. I love this moment when all the screens pop up. It's really exciting. It's like when we do the debates in real life, we turn Eye of the Tiger, flash the lights, and everyone comes up on stage. It's that kind of moment. So welcome to our fantastic panel. On the proposition, we have Thomas, Lucy, and Ife. And on the opposition, we have Wannes, Nina, and Millie. Each of them are going to be introduced as they speak. Here's how the debate's going to work. 3 on one side, 3 on the other side. Each speaker has 3 minutes to put forward the case for their side. You will also see some of the speakers interrupting each other with something called a point of information. So they might interrupt during the speech. These points can either be accepted or rejected by the speaker. So when you see someone saying not right now, they're not being rude, they're allowed to accept or reject. So you'll see that throughout the debate. They'll have 3 minutes to put forward the case for their side. We'll be zigzagging backwards and forwards. After we've heard 2 speakers from each side, we're going to come to you for the floor debate section. So that's where we'll be reading out the questions and points that you've put in the Q&A. So feel free to do those throughout the debate, but when it comes to that floor debate, we will be asking you to put any questions or points. These won't be addressed individually by the speakers. They'll be addressed at the end with the summary speakers before the final vote. So chat is just for general comments and Q&A is for questions that you want to be read out to everyone. So that's how it's going to work. I think that's all there is to be said about the debate. Please sit back, enjoy it. Put your views on what you think about this motion out the window and focus on the debate at hand and what the debaters do in terms of putting their ideas across. So interesting, the polls have come in. I think you should be able to see that, but in case you can't, 20% agree that acquisitions kill innovation, 40% disagree. Wow, we've got 40% undecided. I think that's the highest undecided we've had since the start of lockdown. So it's all to play for, guys. Proposition team and opposition team, it's all to play for. Let's see what the decision is at the end of the debate. Okay, so a reminder of the motion. This House believes that acquisitions kill innovation. Our first speaker on side proposition is Dr. Thomas Herr. He has more than 35 years experience in the AEC and real estate industries. Since the sale of the technical consulting company Valtech, which he co-founded, to CBRE in 2014, the focuses of his activities has been on digital innovation. In May 2020, he took over responsibility for Ivana AG as CEO. In addition, he's president and members of various organizations, including the Institute of German Real Estate and the German Property Association. Georgia and I asked each of the speakers, what's their favorite piece of innovation? And Thomas said his was artificial intelligence. So please join me in a huge round of applause for our first speaker, Thomas. Woo!
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Thank you, everybody. I mean, if you put a bit more focus on my favorite innovation within a debate circle, I think natural language processing would be a more specific application of artificial intelligence. But let's not emphasize on that. Let's make my point why I kind of support the House view that acquisition kills innovation. We have to ask ourselves the question, who is acquiring a company? And the regular case would be that a larger, more institutional company is buying a smaller, more innovative company. That would be my assumption here as the regular case. And in this case, why does an institutional organization buy a smaller, more innovative company? Quite certainly because they would like to get their hands on the services or products that have been developed in the smaller company. So basically the process of a product innovation has come to a specific point at the point of acquisition, which is that the product is ready for market and it's now about being scaled and being distributed. And at this point, a more kind of disruptive, a more kind of groundbreaking innovation turns into a more steady development process of a product, i.e., per definition, the innovation circle kind of coming to a certain downturn. And then you have to see how this process works. Typically, there's a very long M&A process, which requires lots of resources, especially from the leading people in the company. So that already distracts you from further developing the product and distracts you from your client focus. And then in the turn of the process, in the completion of the acquisition, you have to integrate the company into the bigger organization, which always comes with a cultural clash. So you come from a agile, small, very kind of enthusiastic team to a large institutional body, which has its rules, which has certain compromises to take, which has a bureaucracy, which has a lot of focus on internal affairs. And that really makes you slower, that makes you more institutional. It has some advantages too. So you're more safe, you are more kind of perhaps better financed, but you lose your speed, you lose your inspiration, and above all, you lose people. Because what happens in this acquisition, that people leave, and especially the founders typically leave, and with them is all the kind of the brain power, the movement, the momentum in the company, which is gone, and therefore you lose this inspirational power and spirit. And my last point would be that, you know, in these new larger organizations, you starting to become more average, more kind of part of a big machine, like a small wheel in a big machine, and that slows innovation down. If not, it even kills it. So this was my point.
Thank you. Virtual round of applause. I love this, seeing everyone clapping and imagining everyone watching, hopefully clapping. Thank you, Dr. for opening the debate today. Oh, I can see some people commenting in the chat. Just a reminder that the Q&A is open and it will be coming to you for questions for our summary speakers. So please submit your questions that you have on any of the speeches that you hear this morning. Okay, we are now going to go over to the opposition team. And our first speaker is Wannes van Sprenger, who is an entrepreneur. Thank you, I got that thumbs up from him. Who's an entrepreneur and the co-founder of Prom2. And when I asked him what his favorite innovation was, he said it was virtual reality. And especially given the situation this year, it is a great place to be able to have the option to go back to. So should there be another lockdown, that is where we will find Wannes. But please could you all join me in another virtual round of applause of welcoming him to the floor.
Hi, thank you for having me. Well, my point is that acquisition does not kill innovation. If anything, it kills the founders. And a founder of a startup is something special. You always look at innovation, you look at moving forward, you want to solve a problem. That's basically your drive. You want to fix what you believe that is broken. And that idealism is very strong in the beginning, but it runs a little bit down towards how bigger the company becomes, because you move away from true innovation to market potential. And if you look at innovation in its purest form, you can really find that in the beginning of the startup. You can find it in the prototypes, in the vision, in that enthusiasm, or in universities. If you're looking at MIT or other universities around the globe, it's where real innovation is happening, because there is a freedom. There's no market, there's no limitation, there's no risk of financial bankruptcy. The risk is low. So you innovate, and that's what you do. If we look at an acquisition, and purely at the acquisition, there's basically a few things that can happen. And we need to look at two different scenarios. You have the scenario where the company acquires the startup to grow in a very different vertical. You have the startup, the big startups, like for example, a HubSpot that acquired PieSync, to give one example, last year. That company is still a separate company, but owned by HubSpot. HubSpot was a startup, grew up, and knows that they have to give all the expertise, all the cash and the network to the startup they bought, basically pouring gasoline on an already lit fire. They still function as something completely different, but they are acquired. On the other hand, if it is bought to just improve the internal workings or please the shareholders, a lot of the times the people will leave. In both of those cases, innovation stays alive. In the first one, the innovation stays in the company. In the second one, the founders and the first employees will leave, and they will start up. Allowed.
But don't you think that if the founders leave, the people who have the motivation to develop that product and take it to market, and the people who have the most drive for that product to succeed, leave, and that means it gets trapped in a big company's R&D for 20 years?
Great comment. Yes, in that company, it will be lower. That brain power goes away, but they go away with cash. They have money. They will start up new companies, and typically one company, one innovation becomes 6, becomes 7, becomes 100 other innovations. And these companies, they all have a rich bank account, so they have that freedom to start innovating without having to sell it right away, so without interruptions. So that's why I actually say, and I'm going to wrap that up with just saying, for me, innovation comes from freedom, and freedom can come from acquisition. So if freedom is innovation and acquisition is freedom, acquisition must lead to innovation. That's where I wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wannes, for that fantastic speech. And thank you so much for those people commenting in the chat. Looking forward to hearing the questions that come out in the Q&A. So our second speaker on Side Proposition is Lucy Russell. Lucy is a program director at DebateMate. She studied English at the University of Bristol, and while she was there, she mentored on the DebateMate program. So she had a group of students in Bristol that she coached up for our debating competitions. She's a debater herself and has debated all over the world, including attending the European Championships and judging at lots of competitions too. She runs our Education UK programs here in the London HQ, as well as overseeing the Bristol program, and more recently, since lockdown, she's been overseeing all of our virtual debate clubs, which has been an exciting new direction for DebateMate, both with the schools that we work in and with individual students attending their clubs with people all across the country. We asked Lucy her favourite innovation, and she said the vaccine. Am I allowed to say that? I know this is a tech debate, but the vaccine. So give it up for Lucy. Woo!
So I think we had a really interesting bit of contextualization from Wannes in his speech about how this idea that real innovation comes from freedom. So the examples that we were given were small startups, university, the freedom where people aren't worried about the risk of financial bankruptcy. I would argue that there is no point at which you're at greater risk of financial bankruptcy and therefore more risk averse than when your company has just acquired a huge amount of debt to take on a new company and spent a huge amount of executive time instigating this acquisition or merger. So I'm going to talk about some broader market trends between acquisitions and mergers, and why it is that actually statistically on the whole, it's only when companies, or particularly when companies have just taken on or acquired new companies, that they are the most risk averse and actually the least likely to invest in their own research and development and innovation. So I think first of all, there's a few reasons for this. Firstly, acquisitions often serve as a substitute for innovation or in-house innovation. So by kind of idealizing the idea of acquisitions, as Sami introduced, there's a real trend at the moment for companies to be looking outward for this idea of freshness, for new people, for new ideas that they bring in. And this often leads companies to neglect the talent or things that they already have within their own company. Now, this isn't always just a short-sighted thing. There's lots of reasons why intrinsically this is likely to happen. So the first reason is that acquisitions often lead to diversification within the companies. The second reason is one I've already mentioned, which is that they absorb a lot of company money. The kind of example that Thomas gave you of how these acquisitions tend to happen is true that these can often be lengthy negotiations. They particularly take up a lot of executive time of people high up in a company who have to absorb huge amounts of information, take part in tons of meetings to negotiate contracts. They can become very, very focused on acquisitions. This is for the company that's acquiring. For the company that's being acquired, it's quite common that they kind of end up in this state of suspended animation where you're waiting to find out what's happened. You're unable to kind of make long-term plans or investments, and this whole negotiation process can really slow innovation.
Of information.
Yeah.
Yes, Millie?
Thanks, Lucy. And so if your first point on diversification, surely a business diversifying its products allows innovation to be spread along multiple different market areas, across multiple different projects, across multiple different products. And therefore, surely innovation is only greater if you're able to take the new ideas and the new technology that you've got across multiple different areas.
I think that just the idea that by diversifying you're therefore innovating is kind of just not true, and that the idea that just because you're taking on new products or buying new products doesn't mean that that's a particular innovation or a new idea from you. You're actually just acquiring a company that has innovated into a different area already. And what that often leads to is a real spread of resources, like I was talking about, because this company now has less money, they have less executive time spent investing in their own research and development, their own in-house innovation, and being able to actually do research in the area that they specialize in. And this does lead often to a lack of ability from executives to make these kind of investments. So if we go back to the kind of conditions that Vannes was talking about, where we need innovation to thrive, the things that we need executives actually to be able to do is to make a commitment to resources, putting resources into research and development, to make to basically nurture talent within a company, to nurture the conditions that are needed for developing new technologies, for developing new ideas and bringing those into the marketplace. And the times when companies are least able to do that is when they've already taken on a huge financial burden, when executives are distracted or focused on a particular acquisition and they're not able to really focus on their own in-house innovation.
Point of interest.
No, thank you, not right now. Sorry. This is something that isn't just a kind of hypothetical, this is what an acquisition might look like. This is actually why so many acquisitions are unsuccessful. And statistically, if you look at many of the samples or many of the conversations that have been done around acquisitions and what that does to research and development, it's said that more than 80% of companies that acquire a new company actually leads to a long-term downturn in the spending that they put into research and development and the patents that they're able to put out as a result. So statistically, a huge number of acquisitions fail. These are the reasons why. We agree that you need freedom to thrive, but we think that these are not the conditions that you get freedom in. So I'm proud to propose.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And before we move on to our second speaker in the opposition team, just a reminder, please keep sending in your questions. We've got some excellent ones I can't wait to read out and to have our summary speakers answer them at the end. But going forward, please can everyone welcome Nina Elliott. Nina is the CEO and founder of Waxwing Ventures, a company that provides end-to-end property investment services for high net worth individuals and institutional investors. She is also a board member to Agent and Homes, a startup that provides a platform for independent estate agents, which have just successfully closed their SEIS funding rounds. So please could everyone welcome Nina. Her favorite innovation is the smartphone, which I think is possibly mine as well, just because a smartphone means that you do have access to so many other innovations. So I thought that was a really good one. Please welcome Nina.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you very much. Well, yes, indeed, the smartphone is indeed, let's say, one of my favorite innovations over the last 15 years anyway, because we all use it every day, sometimes multiple times per hour. And I think it's really changed the way we do things. And in fact, ladies and gentlemen, the smartphone is a really good example for me to illustrate to you today why we must vote against the motion that acquisition kills innovation. In fact, innovation is an essential part, acquisition is an essential part of the capitalist system that fuels innovation. All smartphones have some innovation in them that was made available by an acquisition. Let's take the original smartphone, for example, the iPhone, which was launched by Apple in 2007. It had this magical piece of technology in it, a touch screen technology, which wasn't due to Apple's original work, but it was the acquisition of a company called ThingerWorks 2 years prior to that made this possible. ThingerWorks at that time actually was not in a very good state. And one might argue that it might not have survived as an independent player and its innovation might have gone absolutely nowhere. But Apple saw something in it, put two and two together and created something truly unique. And by the way, a similar story holds true for the Android operating system that Google acquired in the same year for a small amount of $50 million US, which is really a small amount if one might understand the value that that technology created for the company in the future. And that was only possible because clearly the Android original owners had no sense of value, and Google saw something in it to create something great thereafter.
Information?
Yes.
Okay, but Google, companies like Google and Apple and Samsung also spend literally billions fighting patents because they often stifle innovation. They drown out smaller companies. So are they buying these, are they acquiring to develop talent, or are they just acquiring to increase their market share in order to drive out competitiveness, which is the single most important thing to develop innovation?
Thank you. If you let me get on to this actually in my next part of my statement to you. We often believe that innovation is something that comes out of the blue, that people just have ideas that they dream up. In reality, innovation is often the putting together of two ideas or two technologies and to really create a dent in a universe, as Steve Jobs might have said. And as the example I've just run you through illustrates, is in both those acquisitions, it was really the acquiring partner that made it possible to put these two technologies together and nourish the innovation rather than let it die. And why is that? Well, there's really three main reasons for why acquiring parties are very well positioned to do this. The first is capital. It really takes a lot of money for an idea to grow into a substantial innovation that might change things. And small players often don't have the surplus capital. And so founders spent a lot of time looking for the capital, and often through VC companies anyway, that are looking for acquisition as a possible exit in the future. The second argument, and linked to the first, is time. It takes time to nourish innovation. And with time on your hands and not the need to look for capital, innovators are left to innovate rather than needing to chase short-term profits. And lastly, the third argument really is that it's the knowledge and the scale that these players often bring to the equation. And a really good example there is Facebook's acquisition of Instagram, where it was really Facebook's knowledge of how to build a large social network that made Instagram thrive. And all these 3 points, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I believe are true for our prop tech industry. We have a huge number of small players with brilliant ideas, but very few of them have the scale or the capital to make it into something great. And finally, to conclude, I would have only done half my job if I had only looked at one side of the equation. Of course, there are some acquisitions that fail to deliver massive innovations, but let me just, to answer Lucy's statement, let me just put some statistics on the other side of the equation. We all know that 80% of small independent startups die within the first year. So with an acquisition on the table, there's the chance to turn something good into something great. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, a world without acquisitions, I believe, would stifle innovation in our sector and would hinder progress. And which is why I oppose the motion, and I urge all of you to vote with Oneness and myself against the motion that acquisition kills innovation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. I can't believe that Google purchased the Android system for 50 million. That was a pretty startling fact. Thank you very much. We now come to our Q&A, and we have some excellent questions that I'm now going to read and put to both our summary speakers. And just as a reminder that if you have any questions for specific speakers, we will have time after the debate if you would like to ask those as well. So keep questions coming. I can see lots of them here. The first question is to Oneness, but to the opposition team as well. It says, are you saying that whilst acquisition may kill the innovation of the company being acquired, it gives the founder the resource and inspiration to innovate elsewhere? We've got a question from Joe, who says, if a startup is acquired by a large corporation, they often have to adopt the culture and bureaucratic processes of their new company. When so much innovation comes from the ability to take risks and react quickly, surely the acquisition hurts the startup's ability to innovate. Great question. From Anonymous here, I think acquisitions represent a lack of imagination from bigger companies that we can't think of anything innovative, so let's splash some cash on a company that can. For as long as these corporations stockpile innovative companies, we will see a decline in innovation across the board. So that's a very direct question there for the proposition. Next question, isn't an acquisition a marker of success for a small innovative company? It's a stamp of approval from a large company that then facilitates the growth and development of an ingenious idea. So kind of a point that Nina had mentioned in her speech as well. Let's go to the other chat. I've got a question from Amy, who asks, innovators and founders are not necessarily the best place to carry out implementation and execution. Would you agree? And next question from Ella, which is a question for the opposition team. And she asks, when a company acquires another, the employees on both sides have to learn to collaborate, which takes a lot of time and isn't always going to be guaranteed. Does the lack of trust in these circumstances also hinder innovation? Excellent question there, Ella. Thank you very much. I think there are some more questions that are also coming in as well, from Amy, I believe, again. She asks that the CB Insights reports on top 20 reasons why innovative startups fail, and she cited 3 reasons here. So there's no market need for innovation, potentially, or lack of funds, or potentially not the right team. So what did either team make of this statement? And I believe those are all the questions. So I might give the summary speakers a bit of time, given normally in our debates in school we give them 30 seconds to gather their thoughts, and then they will be summarising their team's arguments as well as addressing the questions that we've asked from the floor. So I'm going to hand back over to Jess in a moment, who is going to introduce the summary speaker for the proposition team.
Thanks very much, Georgia. And there might be one other. Did you read this one, Georgia, about small innovative companies won't have survived through the coronavirus crisis due to lack of resource, and they've been acquired by a bigger company? They would they have been okay? So how could that kill? Yeah, because they might over the last few months. Apologies if I missed that one. I just saw that one pop up and I didn't know if it'd been
Yes, the same. Yeah, thank you, Jess. Great.
Okay, so those questions will be answered by the summary speakers, but we may have a bit of time at the end because I know there were some questions for specific. So we will come to people at the end if we have time. Okay, so summarising the case for side proposition is Iffy Grillo. Iffy's a bit of a superstar at DebateMate. If anyone here has tuned into any of our other debates, they will have come into contact with Iffy. He's a DebateMate student and now at university, so he's studying international relations at Bristol University. Actually, I should say now, Iffy, that he studied because he's finished his degree. Woo! So if he's finished his degree in international relations at Bristol, which I'm sure he'll do very well at, he was a DebateMate student on the programme at the very beginning. And I remember when I used to be a teacher running the programme in my school, taking my students to debate against Iffy, and they'd lose every time. Iffy went on to represent England on the World Schools Debating Stage. To put that into context, only 6 people get selected from across the country every year to compete against other teams from around the world. So Iffy got selected as one of those whilst he was at school in Hackney, the Bridge Academy, and England went on to win the World Championships that year. So you can see why I said he's a bit of a superstar. I think when I was working at DebateMate, we had almost every major newspaper call us for a comment because it was so exciting. So he's a world champion debater. I asked him what his favourite innovation was. He said glasses. So give it up for Iffy. Woo!
Cool, thank you. I want to be clear when I start my speech. I recognize that in some cases, acquisitions have been amazing. But I think the question in this debate is not in the small amount of examples where it goes well, do they exist? The question is, in the majority of cases, are acquisitions good for the market and good for businesses? But I'm going to explain why they are bad for the market and talk about what my team has said. And then I'm going to talk about the individual companies. Why are they bad for the market? And I think the first thing I want to say is I think opposition lives in an idealistic world where big companies are far more benevolent than they act. Because in the opposition world, big companies come in and they're like, do you know what? I just want to help you out. I will buy into your company just so we can take this product to market because that is my biggest incentive. But realistically, what are the incentives of big companies? Why are they often quite not beneficial to the market? Firstly, often it's just to get a patent. So one of the main reasons big companies buy smaller companies is to get into their patents in order for them to increase their market share. That's not about them trying to develop the market. That's not about them trying to take a product to the market. It's about increasing their market share in order to shut out their competitors, which means they have very little incentive to often take these products to market because the principal reason they want that company is just to get their patent. That is why often, like I said in my point of information, that companies like Apple, like Google, like Samsung spend literally billions fighting patent laws because most of what they do is often sit on these patents and for as long as they require out. And why is that? Because often as a big company, you don't have the incentive to take a product to market quickly. Whereas a small company needs to take a product to market as soon as possible in order to increase its market share, in order to get presence. Big companies like Google can just sit on a product for 10 years. It may not work. It may not work with the other products they want to produce. So if Google's like, cool, we've already got what products we're releasing for the next 5 years, they still buy the company. They just sit on it for years and years and years. And that is why they end up spending billions of pounds in patent laws. So the question here is, what is good for competitiveness? And I think acquisitions completely undermine the competitiveness of the market. And I'm going to use the example Nina talks about, because Nina says that Facebook buying Instagram was great because Facebook knows what it takes to be a good player, and Instagram wouldn't have been able to survive. I think that was terrible for the market. Here's why. Because the key reason Facebook buys Instagram and the key reason Google buys other YouTube is because of getting data. Because they know that the way you become dominate in the market is by getting access to as much data as possible in order to make sure you have so much data that you can do things like personalized ads, that you can do things like creating tailor-specific products. It becomes impossible for smaller companies to compete against you because you own so much of the data that's online. That is why Facebook buying Instagram, they have created a slightly better Instagram, but realistically, who's seen the difference? The key thing it's actually done to the market is massively undermine the ability of anyone else to compete in it. I think acquisitions are terrible for market competitiveness. All they do is allow big companies to develop their market share, sit on patents,
Okay.
vital technology is undermined and not gotten out to the market. That's why medical technology, which we needed 10 years ago, is still sitting in the labs of
On
big
that point.
companies. And that is terrible, yes.
So just to clarify, you think the introduction of the iPhone to the mobile market was terrible for competitiveness and led to no innovation?
Yes. I think let's be clear about the iPhones, right? So most developments of iPhone, I think we can all admit that the first iPhone to now, there's been a lot of improvement. But when we ask ourselves, okay, but what's the huge difference between the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10? The answer is often very, very little. Why? Because Apple has absolutely no incentive to be completely innovative in its products because people are going to buy it anyway. If the next iPhone has absolutely no difference between the current iPhone, people will buy it anyway. They have no incentive to be innovative. The differences between them and smaller companies is they do have the incentive to be innovative, but it's the only way people buy their products. Because once you have a brand name, you don't need to be innovative. That's the problem with companies like iPhones dominating the market. You'd much rather prefer a world where other companies have a much bigger ability to compete. So it isn't just about everyone needs one phone, but there's a variety of players in the market. Acquisitions kill that. But finally, quickly,
Point of interest?
companies themselves. No, thank you. Because why do a lot of them fail? Because we accept a lot of startups fail. I want to say a couple of things. Firstly, a lot of the reasons startups fail is because of the bigger companies. Bigger companies create the market conditions, which means it's impossible for them to develop, and then buy these companies at cheap so they can exploit them. So I think when we say they fail, it's important to note that is often because of the bigger companies wanting to acquire them. So acquisition is still often the reason they fail. We'd much rather have angel investing, develop, meaning that they can invest and get more money and build up their capital so they can take products to market. I think we're seeing incredible ways in the 21st century for companies, whether that's people as individuals. I know I've spent money, even if it's £5, in Kickstarters, helping companies raise the capital so they can take good products to the market. We would much rather see that stuff than just continuously big companies being lazy. Because to be clear, we think it's lazy. I think Thomas is right when he says that often, instead of developing your own talent, you just are like, cool, we'll just buy someone else. Because it seems like you're doing something regardless of whether you are actually being innovative or not. I think often what it means is that the founders get some injection of cash, usually nowhere near enough because the deals often they get are very bad to actually be able to develop. I think it means the company culture is often a lot worse. I think it means you have to integrate two companies who have completely different ways of working, which means often what happens is the big company wins. I think these very good staff get laid off from their jobs because they don't fit into the big historical institutional company culture, which means we lose some of the best minds on the market. So at the end of the day, some acquisitions have been great and have created some of the most amazing products. But the trend in the market is ultimately acquisitions create market failure because they lead to a market which is so uncompetitive that people aren't able to develop, small companies aren't able to produce the products we need, which means good products which could save lives are sat in the stock room for 20 years instead of being out in the market. That isn't good. That isn't innovative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ife. An excellent summary speech. I cannot wait to see how the poll will change after Millie's speech. Just a reminder that we will be launching that afterwards so we can see, hopefully, 40% of unsure may be swayed either side, or maybe we'll get individuals from agree to move over to disagree and vice versa. So it is all to play for. Now we move on to our final speaker in team opposition, Millie Dios-Szokowska. Millie, where do I start? Millie is a superstar debater. She has been involved with DebateMate for 6 years and mentored at university before joining the team 3 years ago. Millie has mentored all over the world, in Korea, in South Africa, in Japan. I cannot even express how much she has been representing DebateMate all over the world, and she has been running our schools programs in Manchester and in London, and now is also delivering training in our corporate sector as well. On top of that, Millie also used to play for Man United when she was younger, which is awesome. And her favourite innovation, unsurprisingly, is total football, which I am not sure what that is, but she is going to tell us. So please can we welcome Millie.
Thank you very much, Georgia. And as promised, I am going to explain total football and exactly why I chose it as my key innovation. So total football is a Dutch philosophy of the game of football, embodied and spread by one of the greats of the game, a man called Johan Cruyff. Now, his vision of football as a sport in which space was the principal guiding objective in playing fundamentally altered the understanding and playing of the sport. Now, I chose this innovation not just to flex my somewhat niche footballing knowledge, nor to pitch myself as next season's Match of the Day's female presenter. I did so to demonstrate that innovation doesn't just stem from physical, technological inventions, but from alternate perceptions and their challenging of incumbent assumptions. Now, there's only one team on this debate that has understood their twin manifestations of innovation, the physical and the personal. Now, I'm going to spend my time talking about these two central drivers of innovation and demonstrating how my team has won this debate today. So first, on this element of personal innovation, we think there's two important questions to answer here. The first is what happens to people who stay with the startup company or with the business being acquired and then become part of this bigger machine. And we also think there's a second question to answer. What happens to those who leave? On this first question, what happens to those who stay? We hear from Thomas that these people become small wheels in a big machine. Well, I actually think they have the potential to become big wheels in a big machine. But even if they are small wheels, we think that small wheel, that cog, is crucial to the overall functioning and design of these businesses. Now, look, we all know acquisitions can lead to new organizational structures and a proliferation of knowledge and different perceptions. And these then challenge those incumbent processes, those incumbent assumptions, and those incumbent cultures. And I think this is actually perfectly demonstrated by the experience of my footballing hero, Johan Cruyff, right? He was frustrated at being stripped of the captaincy at Ajax. He leaves and joins Barcelona. There he transforms what was a bang average club into a Champions League winning side. And he does so as a player. And then he leaves and he becomes a manager. And he does the same thing. He comes back as a manager and again wins the Champions League for Barcelona. Now, crucial to this is a second point, because in that 1992 winning team was none other than Pep Guardiola, who took the ideas of Johan Cruyff, who developed them, who continued to innovate and has spread them not just to Spain, but to Bayern Munich in Germany and to Manchester City in England. My point is this: these individuals that are acquired through acquisitions can transform business practices, they transform cultures in an innovative way, and when successful, which we think happens more often than the proposition gives credit, they leave legacies of innovation from which to be built upon and from which further people continue to innovate in the future. But let's not neglect those who leave, because we actually admit that not everyone is made for the bureaucratic big business culture. But one has told you actually...
Good information.
Character, no, thank you, Ife. One has told you that the unique character of those who work in startups, right? From the proposition, we're told that these people are unhappy, that they leave the organization. In fact, they're so demoralized, they never actually ever work again. They're completely lost. They never innovate. We think that's false. We think these people leave with money, with capital, and therefore able to invest in even more radical innovations that those venture capitalists do not invest in the first place. So on both elements, if you look at the incumbent structure, if you look at what those individuals who leave go and do, and both elements of that, we see innovation proliferates, both within the organization, but also externally within the market as well. But let's move on to
information.
Yeah, I'll take you now.
So the problem with that is that big companies often give smaller companies terrible deals because of the market power they have, which means they don't have the money to then start new investments. But often it would be fine if the deals they were getting were great, but in the majority of cases, they often get terrible deals. And that's the reason why the founders don't have the money to start their new products.
All right, we appreciate that there's a difference in power, right? If you're a bigger organization, you have the capacity to dictate those terms more than if you're a small organization. But what we say, if we're talking about monies in terms of the quantities of the millions and indeed the billions that your own team acknowledge these acquisitions take place for, we think billions of pounds is actually enough to innovate. And we're not quite sure of the quantity that you think is needed in order to go and invest and proliferate innovation. But your team yourself, you've already admitted the numbers are more than sufficient in order to go on and innovate. Returning to the second point, right? This point about physical technological innovation, what happens to that piece of technology? We think the opposition actually has an incredibly narrow view of innovation as a singular moment, without actually understanding the continuous process and different stages of innovation that are required for true innovation to take place, for a new product to be delivered to the market and to manifest. Because here's the reality: a lot of startups are not actually market orientated. They're full of individuals with ideas, without actually ideas, without the know-how to deliver a consumable product to the market. Their focus is on singular innovation, on that moment of innovation. And we think any idea or technology in this state, in isolation, without integration, without development into a consumable product, simply cannot be considered a whole innovation in of itself. And we think that acquisitions do two things. They allow people to synthesize different innovations to create a product that leads to ultimate progression and innovation. But we think secondly, and crucially importantly, the entire financial structure around innovations relies upon acquisitions themselves. So let's go to this first point, the point of synthesis, because we actually share the view of the audience here today that acquisitions are markers of success. They're stepping stones towards further integration, and for some actually the only way to survive external economic shocks. Lania talked about the iPhone that co-opted and built upon, the ideas within the startup. We think at worst they're taken to the market and they're integrated into market orientated product. Now, Ife told you that there was no innovation in the smartphone, but we say that's probably because Ife was not around to use a Nokia brick phone 25 years ago. And I think anyone who had that, anyone who had to carry a phone in a suitcase in order for it to function, would look at an iPhone and say that there's done a pretty good job there innovating and providing a much better product. We think that actually innovation through acquisition is a widely embraced strategy, as we've said, not just in the technical sphere, but in areas such as pharmaceuticals, where there are really high barriers to entry that stop new products being delivered. All right. The alternative being defended by the proposition here is that these innovations at best are never synthesized. They don't actually make it to market. They're never developed into products, but at worst, they're lost entirely because they can't survive economic shocks and they never actually make it to the market. All right. Lasted innovation, this isolated innovation that never contributes towards product development is simply not fit to be considered innovation. But just finally on this second point here about the financial structures around innovation, because Lucy told you she saw the big picture, she very clearly didn't. The moments of creation cannot be detached from that system that's designed to drive up innovation. Without an exit strategy, of which acquisitions are a crucial type, we don't see the level of investments in startups that we see today. And we don't see any of those first steps in innovation because there's no end goal for those investors. What have I told you today? Well, actually today my team has shown you quite a nuanced view of this debate. We've shown you that the true nature of the process of innovation is long, and that the ways that individuals can push through cultural and organizational innovation is crucial to your judgment of this debate. We show you that even those who leave go on to innovate far more radically with far greater funds than we see from other venture capitalists, investors within the market. We've also told you that physical technology only exists because of the exit strategy of acquisition in the first place, and simply won't have begun funding initially without this end goal. But we also crucially tell you there are many steps needed to synthesize and market-orientated products, and without these later stages of innovation, we shouldn't consider product development innovative at all. Look, acquisition doesn't kill innovation. It's actually quite the opposite. Acquisitions are the incubators, the developers, the spreaders of innovation in every single conceivable way. And for these reasons, we on Team Opposition beg you to oppose.
Thanks very much, Millie, and to all of our speakers on the debate this morning. Can everyone join me in giving them a big round of applause? What an interesting debate. Well done, everyone. So we've got about 6 minutes left before we end today, this webinar. So the first thing that we're going to do is launch the poll again, so everyone can tell us what they think on this motion. This House believes acquisitions kill innovation. Do you agree? Disagree? Hopefully we won't have as many people that are unsure, because we had such brilliant points that were made by each of the speakers. So whilst you're doing that, just because we've got a few minutes, and I know there were some questions that were targeted at individual speakers, we'll give you an opportunity to address these. So Juanes, there was one very early on which said, so you're saying that whilst acquisitions may kill the innovation of the company being acquired, it gives the founder the resource and inspiration to innovate elsewhere. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, definitely. What we see is a lot of acquisitions, they actually lead into people putting either their money that they earned into new startups, or actually, I'm sorry, I got little kids in the background, they just came home, or they found something new. And every time I see second generation, third generation, that's where investors are looking for. People that have already done it, they've sold, they got that stamp of approval, and they can put money into it, and they know it's going to work. So I absolutely believe that while it's not that innovation, it will lead to more innovation, and more is better.
Great, thanks very much, Juanes. And then Thomas, there was a question here that I wondered whether you might have a perspective on. Jaffa said US-based firm Silver Lake acquired Zoopla a couple of years ago for over $2 billion. Has Zoopla improved since its acquisition? It's a question there. Don't know if you had any.
Probably at least in terms of market share. This is an interesting, that was also Eva's point, you know, sometimes things are not being bought for the innovation, but really to improve market share and then perhaps exclude others from being innovative. And let me make another point here. I think acquisition is not the only way to kind of bring money into a startup or new company. I think there's other ways to get money there, and which might be much more practical in terms of keeping innovation alive.
Great, thanks very much, Thomas. And then lastly, just while the final results come in, Iffy, there was a question to you from Ami here about saying, saying that actually there's loads of innovation that happens. I don't know if you can see it in the chat, but it says you overlook the important fact that it's very hard to stay in a position of a market leader. Steve Jobs himself said that Apple will not be around forever. They absolutely need to spend a lot on R&D than we give them credit for. For every idea they implement, there's 80 that fail. Same for Alphabet, but we just don't see it. There's an interesting kind of point there raised about things going on that we don't necessarily see. I don't know if you had any comments.
Yeah, so I agree. I think the problem is that it's not that Apple isn't innovative. I think it's that Apple has its own idea of what is going to be strategically useful to be innovative for it. So let's say Apple's deciding, okay, cool, what's up? Apple already knows the product is bringing to the market in the next 10 years. I think the issue then is that when they buy a company now, if it doesn't fit into their already pre-existing timeline, it will, even if it goes to market, it will be incredibly delayed. So it's not that Apple isn't innovative, it's just that they're innovative in specific ways which develop and are useful for their company. And often the key reason they buy other companies is for their own pipeline. So like I said, one of the key reasons Apple buys companies is simply just to get their patent or to disrupt their other business. But I think sometimes it's really good for a company to get obviously an injection of cash, like the opposition say, but I think it is just true, especially in the tech industry, especially with companies like Apple, with companies like Google. Ghost patents are a huge problem in the tech industry. They're one of the biggest issues, I think, facing the market and facing competition. And I think in a large amount of circumstances, companies buy other companies to sit on them. Even outside of the tech industry, I also think that's an issue in big pharmaceuticals, where it's true that you need a large amount of money in order to develop new drugs to the market. But I think it's also true that big pharmaceuticals often act in incredibly aggressive ways to smaller players in the market, which is very bad for development and very bad for the actual consumer.
Thanks very much, Iffy. Okay, we have 2 minutes left, so I'd love to come to our guest speakers for any closing remarks on this debate. So Nina, Thomas and Wannes, if you have any closing remarks just to finish this up before we announce the results. So Nina, can I come to you first? Is there any final remarks that you'd like to say for everyone watching?
Well, I think it's been a wonderful debate, and thank you for DebateMate for hosting this. I do think the poll's probably finished now. It's good to take sides in a debate. Of course, in reality, there's always a question about what's the situation around the product, the particular innovation and the acquirer. So I think in reality, there is a balance here to be considered, but it was fantastic to take part in a debate today. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina, and thank you so much for taking part. It was really interesting to hear your perspective. Wannes, can I come to you?
Yeah, sure. I also enjoyed, I like the different points of view. I just had one question that I heard, just very quick, because I came across it yesterday. It's people, the startup also has different levels. So once it hits a certain level of capital raise, it also changes. It also becomes bureaucratic and the people will leave anyway. So that happens anyway. So with acquisition, I know there's already been voted, but just wanted to put that out. It changes anyway, so people will leave. But I really enjoyed it. I really liked hearing the different point of view.
And Thomas, finally, closing remarks before we announce the winners.
Well, I very much admire this very British style of debate, very cultivated, very well thought through. So great to be part of it. And I mean, let me make a final remark to everybody who's interested in innovation. There's a great thinker, Austrian guy, Josef Schumpeter, who has defined innovation not as inventing something new, but bringing it to market, developing a new product. And I think if we discuss this point of innovation, then it's all about how do we bring great new ideas to the market. If it's with acquisition or without acquisition, I don't care, basically.
Great. Thank you very much, Thomas. I can see lots of people nodding there. Thanks to our speakers. Are we able to announce the winners? Hopefully that's going to pop up. Wow. Okay. So we've gone from 20 to 26 in agreement, 40 to 68 in disagreement, and only 5 in unsure. So we managed to sway those people that were sitting on the fence. So well done to Wannes, Nina and Millie. The opposition team, you managed to pull a few people over, but also the agree team, the proposition, managed to get 6% more. So well done to everyone. But the winners of the debate, the PropTech debate combined with DebateMate this morning, are the team in opposition. And thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. It's been a pleasure spending the last hour with you. Please do get in touch with DebateMate if you'd like to find out more about the work that we do. We'd love to hear from you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the summer. Stay safe, everyone, and thanks for tuning in.
Bye.